as you look at the image, it renews itself repeatedly and does something different. It continues to unfold. It continues to provide surprises and, resonances as you look, and so that, it's not a one-shot deal.
Hello, print friends, and welcome. I'm your host, Miranda Metcalf. Each week, I chat with artists who use print-based media to do something beyond the expected. This is a bilingual podcast, so if you subscribe to us, you'll be getting episodes in English with me, as well as in Spanish with Ronaldo Gil Zambrano. Together, we speak to printmakers around the globe about their practice and passions in the world of printmaking. Hello Print Friend is brought to you by Speedball Art Products, who've been offering a diverse range of high-quality products to your creative practice since 1997. But we all know that these products do not use themselves, and so that's why Speedball works with a fantastic lineup of contemporary printmakers who make up the Speedball team of demo artists. Artists like Amber Kaiser. Amber has a sculpture background and feels that printmaking was a natural direction to go into with three-dimensional quality of the printmaking techniques. As a member of Burning Bones Press, she has learned and created with many talented artists throughout the years. Amber's art focuses on the human figure and the environment, whether it's physical or cultural. Lino cut is her primary medium, but she also enjoys etching and clay work. So, if you want to learn a few tricks of the trade and expand and improve your practice with artists like Amber, head on over to Speedball's YouTube channel to see how it's done. There's a link in the show notes. My guest this week is Nick Ruth. Nick is known for his multi-disciplinary print practice exploring signs, signifiers, and communications. In this episode, we both put on our amateur existentialist hats and talk about the ways in which communication brings us closer together and farther apart. We also talk about the strange autonomous power of signs, different street crossing cultures, and his curatorial practice as art practice. So, without further ado, sit back, relax, and prepare to see signs and wonders with Nick Ruth. Hi, Nick. How's it going?
It's going great, Miranda. How are you doing?
I'm really good. I am really excited to have a focused sit-down chat with you. I feel like we've been collaborators, and I got to meet you in person through SGCI this year, which was great. And I've always really enjoyed your work and the way you engage with it, and talking to you in the stolen moments of conferences and via email. And so this is going to be a treat to actually have a chat together.
I completely agree, and I'm forever indebted to you for being there at the right time with a very cozy hat.
Oh, good.
Yeah. I don't know what it is, but every couple of years at SGCI, I lose a hat, and for anybody who knows the state of the top of my head, they might recognize that could be a problem for me. So I was doubly pleased to be able to see you and get the hat too.
Yeah, and that's Madison spring is no joke, so I'm glad I could be of service. Yeah. So, as you said, you're familiar with our little show, so you probably know my traditional introduction questions, but I would love it if you could let people know a little bit about yourself and answer the who you are, where you are, what you do questions.
Perfect. Yeah. So my name is Nick Ruth, and I live with my family in Rochester, New York, good old Western New York on the cusp of the Midwest, or perhaps already in it. I teach at Hobart and William Smith Colleges, which is a small school in Geneva, New York, not too far from Rochester. And then I'm a working artist, that's part of the deal. And my work is mostly in print media these days, although at times it has been primarily in painting or drawing or both. And all three of those things have always been just about always been really important to me.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I've realized as I've been stumbling forward on the course of this podcast, that we've sort of changed the introduction where I now say like artists who use print media, because you dive into it too deeply and you get into this like, well, what is print and like what makes a print? And so it's mostly now, artists, I think, like yourself, who have this strong interest in printmaking and kind of pushing its boundaries of what you can do with it in these really interesting ways. But of course, it's rare that you find an artist who wants to be restricted by medium in any way, shape, or form. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it sort of naturally unfolds that way, actually, at least in my case. And I've heard many people say similar things. You just have to find the right particular medium for what you're trying to get at. And that's not always obvious. And sometimes you just sort of stumble into it. And of course, the medium sometimes leads you to things that are interesting in and of itself. It doesn't have to work the other way around. It seems like it's always symbiotic, that conversation between ideas and materials. But that's the way it's been for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that people maybe don't necessarily understand about printmaking, or kind of gives printmaking not a bad rap, but maybe let's say like a secondary rap, which is that it's just to make multiples rather than like, no, you can make multiples with it, but it's actually a super expansive set of aesthetic tools that you can get really outcomes that only exist through using that medium. Yeah.
It's definitely both and, right? I mean, I'm personally not somebody who is involved with printmaking because of the multiple. But when I think about what printmaking can do and why I was first drawn to it and later drawn to it and endlessly drawn to it, it has to do with that notion that, do you see how beautiful this stuff looks? This is absolutely insane and incredible. And if you want, you can have more than one.
I know. I love that. I love that both and, for sure, because it's just so expansive to be a part of it in that way, where you can have work in several different shows and you can trade work and all of that good stuff. So we're all very lucky to be here. Yeah. And so a little more background about you, Nick, before we start talking about your current practice.
Yeah.
So where did you grow up and what role did art play in that part of your life?
So I grew up in Philadelphia, in what must have been, a 17th century suburb, I guess, or an 18th century one anyway. So 6 miles outside of downtown in the Northwest, a place called Germantown. And it was just an amazing place to grow up. Super racially diverse, really crazy in terms of the housing stock and the way, I guess, the city had grown outward to meet this particular patch of land. There were some beautiful old 19th century Victorian homes, but then lots of row houses and even some what people would have then called housing projects, low-income housing, too. And so that was just normal, and that's just the way it was. But as I think back on it, it sort of seems sort of incredible to me. It was full-on 70s for me as a kid, and so there was all kinds of energy, creative energy, social energy, but also creative energy, and people doing, what we would now call DIY kinds of things, just putting together an art center and, and running classes with, lino cuts and all this kind of stuff. And so there was always something creative happening, and I definitely participated in a lot of that because my parents made it a priority, I guess, for our family, and maybe even more for me because they were a little bit less exhausted by the time it was my turn, because I'm the youngest of four. So I was always had my hand in something creatively, but I didn't identify myself as a maker or as an artist as a core part of my identity until a lot later. So those experiences were important, but I wouldn't rank them as more important as going out and playing wiffle ball until the street lights came on, or whatever the case might have been. I guess street hockey figured prominently in Philadelphia because this was the 70s era of the Philadelphia Flyers. But creativity, yes. Art specifically, well, it was always there. It was always an important part of the education. It was always an important part of the community, but it wasn't my thing yet. Once I got to college, that was when art really entered my life full force. I'd been doing it through high school, and it mattered to me. And in fact, going to college, I thought it was one of the things that I might end up doing. But I weaseled my way into an intro photo class in the second semester of my first year. And had an amazing experience with a professor named Rita Diebert, and she just turned me on to all sorts of possibilities, what this could do, what photography could mean, what it could express, what it could look like. And so I just kind of went nuts on that and really threw myself into it and took a ton of art history classes and just fell in love. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess I want to mention one other thing in relation to that, which is that as a first semester junior, I took an intro drawing class, and I was completely lens based up until that time. But I took an intro drawing class with a guy who really became my mentor for 2 years, and I want to mention him because he just passed away, and he had a profound impact on me. I'm sure he wasn't everybody's cup of tea, but I know he's had an amazing influence on dozens and dozens of artists, and his name was Denzel Hurley, and he's both the person who turned me on to drawing and painting, but also onto printmaking too, because I took an intaglio class with him later, and he just made art something that could be serious. It could be intensely creative, but it could also be intensely thoughtful, intensely self-examining, intensely rigorous. And boy, once I got under his influence, I couldn't tear myself away.
Yeah. It's something that I hear, from doing, coming up on 150 episodes, is that often in that story of how people came to printmaking, there is really a person who changes the course of their life, through their influence and through their passion, or just sort of through their being an inspiring individual. And I just always love hearing those stories, because I think that sometimes people are out in the world and teaching and making and worried about paying the mortgage and doing all of that. And I don't know that everyone realizes that you do have the capacity to be that person for someone. And every time someone tells that story, at least I find it inspiring as like, okay, like here's another example of the way in which that sort of intergenerational passion and love for this medium do get passed on. Yeah. So
yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Lovely to hear.
Yeah, super profound. And I guess I want to say that I think that it's kind of funny, because I do try to, because it was so profound, I do try to think about it, and I can't really tell you what it was that he did. Specifically. I don't know if I could even remember more than a thing or two that he ever said to me. And I think that that's actually, those actors who manage to completely blow you away while saying almost no words. Denzel was like that. He chose his words carefully. He was usually asking questions, and he'd ask you a question, and then he'd just, it was a question that was sort of philosophical and impossible to answer, and then he'd sort of smile and laugh.
So he's like, you're telling me he's like the Daniel Day-Lewis of art making. That's exactly what I'm hearing. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful, because I'm sure it is a question that you must ask yourself as a mentor and a teacher yourself, right? Because like that's what you would want to be for someone, I'm sure. And I think maybe the answer isn't so much that there is one universal formula for this is how you inspire. I think it has more to do with like different keys and different locks, and how different students need to hear different things at different times from different people. And sometimes you just get to be in the right place at the right time. I haven't taught since grad school, when I was teaching intro to art history, but I do sometimes do visits at universities and do studio visits with grad students in that time. And when I was at SGCI, I had a woman come up to me who's now, working at a university somewhere, and she said, "Your crit changed my life," and it's just like, I'm sure it was such an incredible feeling. And it was also just, that idea too of like that. I'm sure it wasn't, that I came down, with like the divine knowledge of art making, and, you could like reach out like God and Adam on the Sistine Chapel. But I think it just was like the key in the lock. Like I just was like the right place, the right time, the right message. That's not controllable, but we have to go through life hoping for moments like that.
Hallelujah.
And so when did printmaking like really, get its claws in your art story? And when did you realize that this was going to be a part of your creative practice in an intrinsic way?
Yeah, so it was there from pretty early on, from after that first intaglio class I took with Denzel, probably as a senior in undergrad. And when I went to grad school, I went directly out of undergrad, which ended up working out great for me. It's not certainly the way it works for everybody, but I continued to make prints in grad school while I was making paintings and drawings. And it always just seemed like another way to explore whatever was going on in the studio, whatever that set of concerns was, or a set of, And it might be I was working representationally, it might be I was working abstractly, but I always wanted to see how that translated into an aquatint or an etching. After that, after grad school, losing easy access to a shop, it wasn't until I started teaching that it came back into my practice. And it came back in a similar way, except for I wanted to expand what I understood, expanded what I could do. So I worked with a guy at a local school here to learn some things about lithography, and I made a series of prints that explored some ideas I was working on and related to hard-edge geometric abstraction in a set of lithographs, but also in a set of big etchings. And I worked on some woodcuts that related to similar ideas about pattern-based compositions. And then my work started to shift away from abstraction and into a period of questioning and searching and uncertainty. And I was struggling with this whole question of how to make marks and how to fill fields, how to make big fields of color that were luminous and bold and allowed for a deeper investigation of color, because I had decided that was something I needed to learn more about. And I was at SGCI in Washington, D.C., and I saw Karen Kunk do a demo of her techniques, and I just thought, oh shit, that's it, that's the one, that's what I got to do. And so I immediately started exploring and experimenting with those techniques, and it just fell right in line. It was this way that I could be extremely painterly in print media. It was a way that I could make big moves of big shapes and big areas that didn't have my hand in it, other than maybe cutting out a shape. And it allowed me to work in layers, so I could build the complexity of an image successively over time, rather than feeling like I had to sum it all up in one shot. Which even with intaglio, sometimes it feels like, you kind of have to key in that image, that basic idea. And I guess that's mainly me, because, I've never been a good scraper and burnisher. So, in my intaglio prints, I put it in and then it's kind of stuck. Mm-hmm. And then it's a matter of, twiddling the knobs, trying to adjust the tonal relationships or whatever. But with this approach to just, basically monoprint or monotype, I could just keep laying things down. And because I was laying them down in such thin layers of highly transparent color, things would get so rich, but still stay lively. I wouldn't end up with those kinds of deadened surfaces that you can sometimes get when the ink gets too heavy and too opaque. So yeah, it was probably, I'm not positive. I think that might have been 2007 or something, or 2008. And since then, it's been dominantly print media for me. I just, there's always something else and some other way to harness that set of visual effects that's possible, towards some kind of formal structure that best expresses the set of ideas I'm working on.
Yeah. And in terms of the content of your work, it looks like you've been interested in signs for about 10 years. Is that right? Yeah.
To me, the umbrella term is communication. And, so that goes, I suppose, in some philosophical directions, but...
I love that. Like, let's dive in. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so as a good old, sort of amateur existentialist, I think about that kind of issue of the possibility of connection with people, and I'm always wondering about, where the meaning and the meaningfulness is and how to get at it, because I definitely experience my life as filled with moments of meaningfulness, and they are what brings me a feeling of joy. But, I'm also aware that communication is inevitably fraught and inevitably complicated. It's just not the case that somebody says something and then whoever's hearing it gets everything that the person who said it meant. So there's something weird about this whole notion that meaning gets constructed in that exchange, right? In the words themselves, and then all the assumptions and experiences that the listener is bringing to that, and all the assumptions and experiences that the speaker is bringing to that. And so I sort of conceive of this as these two entities with this kind of buzzing, alive space between them. But it's a buzzing and alive space that's fluid, it's where it's difficult to pin things down. And so communication per se strikes me as being, really, really, really important. And beginning to think more in those terms kind of dovetailed with a moment where I was working with kind of sort of Rube Goldberg machine imagery where, I was doing these tautological machines like weather systems where it just sort of repeats itself and the water goes up and it goes into something and then the cloud rains it back down and then that's collected and then round and round it goes. And the forms were big and just kind of wonderful boxes and tubes and holes and all this kind of stuff. And I was driving along to work back and forth, and this is around the time when cell towers started to appear. And they just started to punch into my eyeballs all the time. Just driving along and like, what the hell is that thing? And where did it come from? And what does it do? Where's it? What the hell is going on? And yet simultaneously, man, that's cool looking. I'm ambivalent about that. I don't think I like it as much as the trees, but it's kind of cool looking. It's an amazing piece of engineering, and those dishes are weird and cool. And then you start to think, oh, well, I could work with those shapes, and those shapes are kind of compelling. And you know what? That thing is about communication, and it's this big thing in the landscape that's just calling out to us and telling us about what our culture thinks is important, because here it is. It's stuck in the landscape. And I guess we all agreed to that,
Yeah. I think that's funny that you should say that, we all agreed to it, because as you were talking, I was thinking about the fact that, you do make these really compelling and just straight up beautiful images of cell towers, which is really putting them through such a different lens than they're usually seen, where I think people do maybe see them as intrusions, but perhaps only because they feel like they didn't have a choice about it, right? Like there's something about the human rebelliousness that the very fact that nobody asked you if you wanted this cell phone tower or this wind turbine in your view, that people will object to it, because it seems like an imposition by its very nature. And you didn't seem to have that response. Well, you were looking at it, through an artist's eyes, if that like, oh, look at those forms, but yeah, it's funny. Yeah. Because we obviously have, because if we valued not having cell towers over cellular communication, they wouldn't be around. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, and that just sort of fits into all these dizzying conversations about, our economic structure, the premises and functions of capitalism and who's leading whom around here, whether, powerful people create markets or whether people do, or unpowerful people do. What makes us all want cell phones so bad? Is it because they're there, or is it because we really, really, really need them? Is it because people are telling us we need them, or is it because we really, really need them? And so I have a tremendous degree of ambivalence about all of that stuff. And I remember my uncle, who was a Presbyterian minister in New York City, across the 70s and 80s. I lived with him for a summer, and one evening at dinner he said to me, "So, do you believe in change or progress?" Like, whoa.
I can only pick one?
Yeah, right. But that was the question that he was posing that stuck with me to this day, because it's a profound question. And really one that's tricky to solve, because certainly so many of the technologies that I might be, critical of, as, degrading our individual or collective or community experience, are things that have done really, really great things for human beings too. Medical technology would be an example. The kinds of medical interventions that are possible now, but that doesn't answer some of the philosophical questions about what makes a life meaningful. So, I mean, in the back of my mind, this stuff is all percolating along while I'm working. And I really conceive of my work as objects for contemplation. And I mean that in two important ways, because it's very serious to me that it's visual, and that is core to what I value personally and what matters to me personally, and it's core to what I hope to try to provide. Because after all, I'm making a thing and putting a thing out into the world too, and I want that thing to be something that provides a perceptual experience that is beautiful, that provides beauty to the viewer. And my version of beauty in that sense has to do with formal complexity or formal sophistication, so that, as you look at the image, it renews itself repeatedly and does something different. It continues to unfold. It continues to provide surprises and resonances as you look, and so that, it's not a one-shot deal. But I want that same thing in terms of ideas too. I want the work to open up lines of thought for people that make them wonder about the things that are being discussed.
Yeah. I think that idea of just, that kind of buzzing space between two individuals, as you called it, who are trying to communicate, and what is going on there is such a fascinating question. And it's one that I've been thinking of a lot more in the last 6 months, having moved back to an English-speaking country. Because when I was in Thailand, and I didn't speak very much Thai, but you get by with what you have, and you get by with gestures. And it really is, in terms of communicating with people you don't know very well or strangers, it's you have to distill things down to what is necessary. And there's not a lot of reading social subtext, or anything like that. Right. And then coming back to the States and working my new job and working with people and working with egos and working with people over text and over email and over phone call often. It, the amount that can be miscommunicated with these new communication pathways has just been fascinating to see when you're both using the same language. Where before I'm using Google Translate, I'm asking friends for help, even to just do something like rent our apartment, right? And if I can just get to the goal of renting the apartment, it is successful. And there's not all of these more subtleties when you're dealing with a language barrier. And, it reminds me a bit, there's like a Nabokov quote that's the cranium is a space traveler's helmet. And it is just, this is going to sound, speaking of armchair existentialist, or what did you call it? Like, part-time existential, or existentialist, amateur existentialist. Yeah, I love that. Is that, ultimately, like, that experience of being a human, of walking around in your cranium, your space traveler's helmet, it's kind of fundamentally alone, and there's only you in here. And we walk through life and we try to alleviate that loneliness, I think, through communication. That's the only way to do it. That's the only way is, whether you're writing to someone or you're talking with someone, it's alleviating that fundamental aloneness that we're all born with. And so to go from Russian literary to Donnie Darko, eventually every living creature on the planet dies alone. That's fundamentally an alone thing as well. And so this journey from what I think can be really a lonely experience of being a human with self-awareness, stumbling through life. The only reprieve from that is through communication. And of course, as you're speaking to, the complexity of communication has just become exponentially more difficult, but also accessible, but also nuanced in such a short period of time. And our little brains, like our poor little brains, like, how are they going to ever catch up with it,
For sure. I mean, I don't want to be glib about it, but I mean, I don't know. Often I don't know what I mean to me,
Yeah.
Like when I'm talking to myself, I mean, what are you talking about? Like, well, I'm saying the thing. Well, what are you talking about? And much less how anybody else is understanding what I'm saying, and it just seems so overwhelming sometimes. But it is where the joy is, and I think about that too, and I think it's really, really important. I mean, I guess talking about communicating is in its own way an act of resistance to existential dread. And one thing that's always rattled around in my head as a model that I don't know if everybody would agree with this, but I just think about, for instance, blues music, and the relationship between what reading a lyric from a blues song, let's say a blues song that's not trying to be funny lyrically, but that's just trying to tell a sad story, and then hearing the music, the juxtaposition of those two things is so powerful. I mean, if you're that depressed, how can you pick up the guitar? And yet picking up the guitar is the only response to something that hard and that sad, or whatever the case might be. And so listening to that music becomes joyful, actually. It becomes this joyful resistance to, the more challenging things in life. And I connect to that personally. I aspire to having some kind of related effect.
Yeah. There's a new book out by Susan Cain that's called Bittersweet. And I don't know, I think it came out just a couple of days ago. But it's in that book, she talks about melancholia in music and this feeling of bittersweetness and how there is something in there that alleviates that kind of fundamental pain of being a human, knowing loss, knowing impermanence, knowing your eventual end and what everything you love's eventual end, and that is in a way kind of the key to a lot of spiritualism that in our secular world we're missing. Because we don't have that ashes to ashes and dust to dust experience of going and worshiping in organized ways. Many people don't. Some people still do, obviously, but and that music can do that in communication, and that way that people connect is that kind of relief. It's the release valve of the of that, like, well, at least we're all in it together, which is always so fascinating to me, that like for some reason, if you've gone through something really, really hard and then you meet someone else who's also been there, it does relieve the pain. And I don't understand what's happening there. Like, I don't know why that works, but it does. And we need ways to communicate for that. And, and now we have memes we can send,
Yeah, but we also still have, beautiful sad music, or, beautiful pictures, or beautiful plays, or beautiful dances that express, the full range. I mean, I think that, it's connected to both the very concept of sharing on the one hand, and then it's also connected to this human capacity for invention, for inventing forms to carry our messages about our experiences. And so, there's something about particular chords, or there's something about particular dynamics that accesses that thing, that accesses that same thing that you get when you talk to somebody who's experienced something related to what you have. And I just had a conversation with a friend who I don't get to see very often. And he and I lived together in the 90s, and it just so happened that our fathers passed away within 6 months of each other. And we're just bonded for life because of that experience. and he said, "Yeah, I was going to text you, back in October, because it's been 30 years, and just wanted to reach out and make that connection." And I don't know. It's just it strikes me that we're talking about some profound stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, and that is like kind of the only balm I know of going through something like losing a parent. Is someone else just like seeing you in that, mm-hmm. and there's no better way to see someone in it than I think to also have lived it. Yeah.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. Well, man, what do you want to talk about now?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the joy of it is in there too. And I got to say, I've been doing some things that have been bringing me a lot of joy recently.
Yeah.
So can I just sprinkle some glitter on all the death talk here for
totally.
Yeah.
And I do have like more very specific art questions too that I don't want to make sure we get to, but let's talk about the joy and the pain here.
Yeah. Well, right. And because I don't I've posed this all as existentialism, but I think that I'm more comfortable really in the end with posing it as about wondering. And I'm absolutely positive that, most artists would say that, one of the things that they strive for is attentiveness or awareness. And that's being attentive and aware to their surroundings and to the people they interact with, but also to the materials they work with and the images that they make. You want to be receptive, because that's the petri dish for invention, is that, when you're receptive, when you're paying attention and you notice things, you can capitalize on them and turn them into something. And so that ends up being that notion of attentiveness ends up being, I think, really, really important. But connected to that is this whole thing of wondering. And that's what it is for me mostly. I'm just moving around through the world and I'm just wondering about it, and I'm not actually staking out definitive positions. I mean, I definitely have some, but often I feel like I can't say in any kind of definitive way, cell towers are good.
Yeah.
Cell towers are bad. Road signs are good. Road signs are bad. I'm just more fascinated by their very fact, by the fact that they're there, and what all the set of related meanings are that comes from that, by the fact of billboards out in the middle of open fields or crammed on top of buildings, and the messages that they're selling. And road signs, that's our social contract. I mean, it tells us what you can do and what you can't, and it's not, and there's no sort of ambivalence on the part of the state when the sign goes up and the message goes on it. So I'm interested in wondering about those things, and then sharing that wondering in a way that uses visual relationships and visual, compositional structures to present something else at the same time. So I want to look not so much at the messages that are being carried, but I kind of want to look at the messenger, which is why I'm often depicting signs from the other side. I'm interested in exposing the message carrier, the very structure itself, because I think the structures are interesting, and I think they're sculptural, and I think that they're compositionally fascinating, but I also think that there's something that we should notice and wonder about. What's going on there? So that leads me into all kinds of different things.
Totally. They're so interesting to kind of think about them as their own almost autonomous figures of authority. And I was thinking about, maybe it was at SGCI, we were talking about your cell towers as actual portraits, you would do of a person, and that kind of like loving gaze you can give them. And Santa Fe is really like I called it a little hamlet the other day. Like it's not very big. There's very commonly you will find dirt roads just going to someone's house. And you're driving around, especially off tourist season. I found it's starting to pick up now, but like heading home from an opening or something, and you could be on a very empty road, and you come to a four-way stop, and you can see that there's no one coming from either direction. And I will do a full stop with the rollback, like because the sign told me to. And not only that, but I would feel bad and weird about not doing that.
Yeah.
I am that deep into the social contract. I'm also Norwegian by heritage, so it's in my blood too.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, it's so interesting to think about these omnipresent objects in our life that control our behavior, but also fade into the background unless someone, like an artist like you, brings them to the foreground and starts asking these questions about them. And like you said, not in this way of stop signs are bad. I don't think anyone would say that.
Right.
But more of this kind of wondering of, hold on a minute, what is this thing that's in our world? What is this thing that we, at least in my case, like I have almost, a little bit of fear of, like, I gotta do what that sign says. I gotta do it. Same with speed limit signs on the long, empty roads of New Mexico, where there's no cops, there's no police helicopters, there's no one would know.
Yep.
No one would know, and yet I have to do what the sign says. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You're kind of fascinating to think about that broader set of social relationships and the role of sets of rules in both controlling us on the one hand, but also maybe comforting us too, because, one of the things that you're always wrestling with is what's the right thing to do. And, the states solved that for you, at least when it comes to an intersection. They've made it possible for you to have the comfort in knowing that this is the right thing to do. This is what's good for us all, as if I just abide by this, and everybody else should too. I don't know. Maybe there's some comfort in it too. Maybe there's something that feels that feels a little simplified and takes away the need to have to decide as an individual about every single thing. I mean, I think that that's something that, communities per se, cohesive communities, and I guess religious communities is one of the things that pops into my head, probably offer. I think that there are some potential downsides there, and certainly with both states and religions, or any organization and any institution, there are opportunities for abuses of power. But systems of rules, conventions, I guess, social conventions, they can really help too.
Yeah. And I'm sure that there is a correlation too between my desire to follow the social contract and the extent to which the social contract has benefited me.
Yeah.
As well. I think that's certainly in there. I am a white blonde lady with a master's degree. Like, in a lot of ways, our social contract privileges me. And so no wonder I'm, driving around being like, gotta do what that sign says because look how it's turned out,
Yep.
And I mentioned kind of in passing, being Norwegian. And I think, one of the things that we maybe have talked about is how culturally Norwegians are big sign followers. And like I said, I have family there, and it's, you're standing on a street corner and the don't walk sign is on in downtown Oslo, and there could be no cars coming.
Yeah.
And nobody's walking.
Yeah.
And but that is a society that really takes care of its people. That social contract says if you have a baby, if you want to go to college, if you need medical help, our society is there for you. And I don't know, maybe there's like a correlation there as well. It's hard to say. Yeah.
I'm left wondering, I got to say, right? Because I agree with everything you're saying, and yet I just don't quite know where to go with it, right? I see the possibility of, what might seem like a benevolent overlord, going wrong pretty bad. And I think there are a lot of historical examples of that. But on the other hand, libertarianism with a capital L, seems pretty terrifying too.
Yeah. And I think that in a way for me, like signs and following them, it can really stand as this general good kind of comparison to that gray space of all of that, that I think, as you say, we have yet to see one fully functional example of a benevolent dictator in the history of the world.
Yeah.
Or, as you say, like that, the kind of chaos of every person for themselves. And there is a gray, messy area where societies kind of stumble forward in. So, like, I will jaywalk like crazy, but I won't do the running the stop sign in the middle of the night, so it's like I for some reason have come up with a set of rules in my head about the signs I have to follow and the signs I don't, and it is that that messy area of humans wanting to have the set of rules that you can look to and you can say, this is it, this is done, you don't need to make judgment calls ever again, just follow this path and it's going to be okay. But of course that never happens, right? There's, and I think there's something in there, whether it's like 10 commandments, right? Which of course are often written in signage, or Jordan Peterson's, was it 10 rules for life, 12 rules for life? I don't know what it is, but, he wrote some book like that was quite popular too. And, more on the libertarian side. So yeah.
I can totally relate to that, and I'll never forget, growing up in a big northeastern city, and the main thing, as I understood it, being say a high school person, was you have to read what's happening around you. So you're scanning for maybe dangerous situations of all sorts, and one of those is where and when you can cross a street. And so you just get pretty comfortable just crossing it wherever, as long as you're not going to get run over, right? That seems pretty sane and pretty normal. And then I went to college in Southern California, and I would do the same thing, at least initially. Halfway through a block, and I see an opportunity to cross, and I know I'm going to be, well in front of that car that's coming, and start to cross, and everybody slams on the brakes, because the car culture in Southern California related to pedestrians was totally different,
Totally.
Somebody started to cross the road, man, you better stop, or you're, so they were following the rules too, but I wasn't in compliance with that culture.
Yeah.
It just sort of absolutely illustrates this dynamic you're talking about.
Yeah. I had the same experience, the opposite one, coming from Seattle, where you literally just can walk out in front of a car and they'll be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And then I went to DC and learned really quickly that I think that car was trying to kill me,
Yeah.
Very, very different.
And then there's the other one, and this is brilliant too. So as part of my job, I've had the insane, talk about privilege. I have all the privileges that you're talking about and others too. And but one of them has been the opportunity to direct or co-direct study abroad semesters. And so
wonderful.
Been able to live abroad a little bit and with my family, which is so cool. And one of the places that we've gotten to do this is in Rome. And basically the lesson we learned about, the pedestrian culture in Rome is you can kind of just go ahead and cross the street, but once you start, don't stop, don't hesitate, because the cars know what you're doing and these drivers are really good and they'll just go around you, right? But if you hesitate or stop, you get run over because people won't expect that. And it was pretty.
It's so interesting. And one more crossing street anecdote. When I first moved to Thailand, it's, kind of famously, chaotic Bangkok traffic. And of course, well, really when I first visited, this was more of an issue. But the driving on the opposite side of the street than I grew up with.
Right.
And so what you do, though, is you have to find a soy dog. You have to find a street dog that's going to cross. And you have to cross with them because they can watch the traffic and they know how to cross the street safely.
Amazing. Amazing.
So, yeah, it's so interesting. You have to find one of the locals and they'll help you. Yeah.
It's a free-floating service dog.
Yes, exactly. That's why I adopted two of them. I'm thinking a little bit about if we can, in the time we have left, circle back to the cell towers specifically, because we've been talking a lot about signs and of course cell towers are another form of communication, and thinking about the kind of obtrusiveness of them. And I was actually thinking about your work the other day because I was up in Taos and I was driving around with a friend, and there was this cell tower that had been disguised as a tree.
Oh, yeah.
And it was this giant evergreen. And we're in the middle of the desert. Like, things don't grow higher than like maybe 7 feet tall, and they're piñons and they look really different.
Yep.
And it was this weird, it would have been less obtrusive had it just have been a cell tower.
Right.
Because it just looked completely out of place on these flat, open plains. And I thought about you and your work and your kind of interest in like the hidden and the exposed in this sort of visual chatter that takes up our daily lives. And so I'd wondered if you'd ever thought about exploring that strange aping of trees that cell towers can do.
Yeah, I have thought about that. And yet, as it turns out, it seems to me to somehow be more direct to talk about the sort of, what do they call that? The baldness of it all, the directness of the unadorned, matter-of-fact cell tower, and the unadorned or matter-of-fact billboard or sign, but the cell towers in particular. Those other ones, they're actually almost too comic, they're just so fucking hilarious that this thing is got branches.
Yeah.
And, behind which are these little dishes that are doing the work. It's like they're dressed up for Halloween or something.
Yeah.
And it's so strange. It's so, but it's kind of funny. They just make me laugh when I see them, actually. So I get the dynamic that you're talking about. But that does actually circle back to this other issue of the forms, and it really is there is something specific about the structures and the shapes that are involved in the cell towers that I find kind of irresistible. And I don't know if it would work as well for me if it was now adopting the language of, say, the natural landscape, which certainly people are trying to do to make them sort of, air quotes, fit in. But I don't know if I would be able to work with that.
Well, I mean, I feel like you do so much to alter the cell towers to make them very aesthetically appealing, while at the same time it's very, very clear what they are. And I think that is a little bit of the artistic magic that's happening in your work. And it would be really strange, I think, to kind of take that framework and try and put it over that kind of a cell tower, because they're already, like, I think sort of what's happening, what's sort of so fascinating, sort of interesting visually, is that you're taking something that's so utilitarian and making it beautiful. And so to something that's already trying to be beautiful, or trying to at least be like unobtrusive, that has an aesthetic consideration already built into it, I don't know that if it would be as interesting of a flip-flop sort of visually.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with it. But, I don't want to foreclose the future.
Right. Yeah. It was so funny. Next time I go by, I'll take a photo for you, because it's such an interesting thing that's happening where they're just making it so much worse. Yeah. Because we do edit out cell towers in our landscape. We don't see them.
Right.
And yet to make it an evergreen tree, it was just bizarre. Yeah. It was so like very much like a sore thumb. We don't have a whole lot of time left, but I'd love it if you could talk a little bit about the curatorial side of your work as well, because I feel like that is something that definitely is a part of your artistic practice too. And you've curated some really interesting signs. I'm thinking of like the Science and Signifiers exhibition that I got to see the catalog of, which was beautiful. And just kind of speak to that and how that maybe fits in to overall what you do.
Yeah. I guess I want to sort of begin talking about that by just emphasizing the whole chicken and egg nature of everything for me. And it's just so easy to talk about things, especially in retrospect, as if there is this concrete narrative that makes it obvious that this had to lead to this, and this had to lead to that, and this had to lead to this. And this is true in my work, in the relationship of the subject matter that's under consideration, and then also the visual structures and the materials I use. It's just not the case that it works from idea to materials to image or It's working in all different kinds of directions. And I feel the same way about things like curating, which seems like a fancy word for what I think I'm doing, which is I'm just continuing to think about the things that I think about and noticing kindred spirits and wanting to have conversations with them. And it feels completely woven into the way I'm approaching my work in the studio, the way I'm thinking about it in the studio, and also woven into teaching too, because one of the things that I've taken the opportunity to do is to try to curate shows at my school in those years when I'm the person teaching our senior seminar for studio art, because it seems like such an amazing opportunity to pull seniors into something that's going to involve those kinds of ideas on the one hand, but also that set of professional practices, just what it takes to install a show or to light a show or to design or all that kind of stuff. But intellectually, it really is about the conversation with other artists. And it is about seeing and recognizing the people's interests and people's overlapping interests, and then trying to put artworks in relation to one another in ways that create interesting and new trains of thought, I guess. And so that's kind of how I've approached it all along. I did a show in 2009, and man, I wish I'd made a catalog. I've thought several times to myself that I would like to go back and make a catalog for that. And that one was called Nice Place to Visit, Printmaking and the Anxious Landscape. And they were just such amazing people doing such cool, weird things in relation to the landscape. Many or most of whom I found by wandering around Open Portfolio at SGCI, where you've got dozens and dozens and dozens of amazing artists just saying, here's me, here's what I do. And so I'd walk around Open Portfolio for a couple of years, whatever, and I'd just notice what people were working on. And then the idea would form, and then I'd say to them, hey, I'm thinking about this thing. Would you be interested in participating? And they'd say, hell yeah, I would. And I'd say, okay, cool. And then it would just sort of roll forward like that. And the signs and signifiers thing was very similar. It was something that I initially proposed as something to be at the MAPC conference, and it was at the MAPC conference in Louisville in 2016. And that just was so exciting and thrilling to bring together that group of artists and to put their works in conversation with each other. And then I reprised it back at my school and adjusted it a little bit and brought the students in to be involved. So I don't know. It doesn't seem to me that all that separate or distinct. And I guess that's an important thing. And then there's the question of just looking for opportunities to be in conversations, right? Like there's looking for ways in which you as a maker and as a creative can present a conversation, right? And invite people into it. But then there are other conversations that are already happening, and maybe you want to see if you can be a part of it. And that's what happened with the IPEP, International Printmaking Exchange Program out of India, run by Rajesh Pularwar. I got contacted by a colleague and friend, Fahima Vadat, who had done it, and she said, well, you might want to consider it. And so I participated as an artist one year. And then after some programming that we did in relation to that here in Rochester, that also involved the symposium where we brought in really cool people to talk about the tradition of the exchange portfolio. The folks at IPEP invited me to be the curator for the following year. And so, I mean, it's really this one big tumbling amorphous. I'm imagining the Blob from the movie, like moving forward almost in a slug-like way, but sort of one little arm reaches out and does this thing, and then the next thing, but it's always kind of slowly grinding forward, with not all that much compartmentalization, really.
Yeah.
Because these things flow together so well. I mean, I wouldn't have it any other way. It just seems like such a rich life it is such a rich life to be able to be somebody who makes things and has a solo artistic practice, but somebody who collaborates, and somebody who curates, and somebody who participates. And I don't know, it's exhilarating, really.
I think that's so significant what you're saying about it, really being the amorphous blob, because of course, as creative people, anything and everything can be part of that practice. I can have a conversation with the checker at Trader Joe's that might show up in one of these podcasts. I can listen to a book on tape. I can go to an exhibition, and it's all feeding into this thing, which is I just got to make things for some reason.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sure that like curation and getting to work so closely, as you mentioned with those artists, it's got to all be a part of it. Yeah. All in the continuum.
100%. And it's this self-feeding thing too, because the excitement generates excitement, which generates excitement. And there are always new threads. I think about this, like if the metaphor were, life as a hallway or something like that, well, it's got doors, right? And so just keep opening them and go for them. And you just don't know where all that's going to lead. But as long as you're talking to people who or reaching out to people or interacting with people who, have shared interests, then you're pretty guaranteed to be having a conversation that you care about. And hopefully you can bring something about your caring into that conversation that might be valuable to them too.
And be a little less lonely in that spacesuit,
Right?
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I guess that's the other thing. And I mean, maybe, I hope it's not corny or repetitive, right? Because just about everybody you talk to will say this, but that is one of the things about printmaking that is just undeniable and so critical, which is that it's a real community and a generous community.
Absolutely.
So, geez, I mean, you have a question about some technical thing and you're going to get more feedback than you could possibly want.
That's so true. It is. Well, I feel like that's a beautiful note to wrap up this chat on. And speaking of the community and people with questions, where can people find you and follow you?
Probably Instagram is a great place to go, and I'm sort of chagrined, but at my waspy middle initial. But my Instagram is at Nicholas H. Ruth, and then I'm on Facebook too, and then I have a website which is www.nicholasHruth.com, and those are the best places to go. I'm happy to interact with anybody and answer questions and be in conversation. I absolutely love that. So I'd welcome people to interact.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. This was really, really fun to, like I said, get to have a long form discussion with you and get to, flex all the philosophical, existential muscles that I'm really just walking around flexing all the time. Basically, I'm, sitting at the stoplight listening to Leonard Cohen, doing this. And so it's always delightful to get it out there and, connect with another print friend. So thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Miranda. It was really fun.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, I will be in touch when I know this is coming out. And let's find an excuse to work together more.
Amen.
Sounds great. All right. Have a great afternoon.
Yeah, you too.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
If you like today's episode, we also have a Patreon where you can help us keep the lights on and get bonus content like Shop Talk Shorts, where our editor Timothy Pauschak digs deep on materials, processes, and techniques with past guests. Also, if you've listened this far, you might be that special kind of print friend who would leave a review for us on Apple Podcasts. It would mean the world to us if you did. And that's our show for this week. Join me again next week when my guest will be Robert Kipnis. Robert is famous for his dramatic, emotional mezzotint landscapes with windswept trees and evocative lighting. We talk about how a chance elective in art led him to a solo show in New York City 7 months later, taking up printmaking well into his painting career, and what it takes to be successful artists. You won't want to miss it. This episode, like all episodes, was written and produced by me, Miranda Metcalf, with editing by Timothy Pauschak and music by Joshua Weber. I'll see you next week.